Hey,
Camille,
we're on.
how in the world are you?
It's a whirlwind right now, but a good one, huh? So,
Yeah, yes, indeed. I agree. And I'm glad we're doing our, second what we'll call coffee chat. I actually do have coffee here, but I know it might be
I've got
depending
water.
on how you roll. But I can think of no other person I like to do conversations like this, partially because I don't know if you felt this way back in the day and you only have to say yes. But when we met back at my first CPEC summit many, many years ago, I was like, I like this vibe. I like
Yes.
her. I don't know her, but I like her kind of
And
thing. So
I felt the same way because you were doing just this transformative work around housing and your panel discussion. I remember just the energy and the expertise that you brought, and I knew we'd be friends forever.
I was worried about some of those bad jokes I was going to use, and hopefully we've gotten past that.
Yes.
But I'll try to make as many pop culture references as I can. We should probably dive into intros. Obviously, I'm Calvin Gladney. I'm president and CEO of Smart Growth America. I'm conductor of the orchestra, although I do not play all the instruments. And I have with me Camille Manning-Broome, who will introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Calvin. And to all those chiming in today or tuning in today, I'm Camille Manning-Broome, President and CEO of the Center for Planning Excellence, a nonprofit that works across the state of Louisiana, assisting all scales of government with planning, from the neighborhood scale to state level planning on big, complicated issues. And so we've been around since 2006, worked in over 50 communities, and I'm so proud to be a newly appointed board member to Smart Growth America, who we've been partners for such a long time. So
Awesome. And well, thanks for saying yes, by the way. Theoretically, someone could say, nah, yeah, but thanks, but no thanks. But so I appreciate you because obviously you have to take the time and you bring an energy and verb to the board, which was needed. I'll leave it at that. I just can't wait to see some more of your contributions.
mhm,
Just did want to ask you one sort of board specific question in our chat.
mhm, mhm.
And just thinking about why you wanted to join the board. Have you learned anything? That kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I started thinking about this when I was in grad school. Gosh, close to 20 years ago.
Child
I
prodigy, I suppose.
Yeah. I was I was at the School of the Coast in the Environment at LSU and focused on at that climate adaptation. And I was asked by my professor to help in building out a library for students around smart growth. And it was the first time that I learned all of the terms and everything about it. And so I became a fan at that time because your organization and leaders there were charging the way on that. And so when I began working at CPEX, I think we started partnering to work. We would bring big groups to the New Partners for Smart Growth Conference. We'd
Mm,
bring, 10 or 12, 10, 15 elected officials from across Louisiana. And we began partnering very closely at that time. And I think it's just increased. And we've always used your resources and data and publications and advocacy efforts to help us in Louisiana, help our communities and increase quality of life and better planning. And so um, I've always been a fan, and that so when we started talking about it and you asked, it was a no-brainer.
awesome. Well, and just in talking about partnership, it made me think as I looked at all the people who were joining, and we got folks from Wisconsin and Iowa, presumably smaller organizations and smaller places. What's your thoughts on how, folks who are smart growthers, I see my friends at 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin on the line, how they can partner with an organization like Smart Growth America. So partnering with a national organization on sort of aligned topics, like what are your insights there, and what have you seen works well?
Yeah, so what I appreciate the most about our relationship with SGA is how you connect us to data and to resources on a national level, which helps us set the context for our work in Louisiana. So, for instance, saying that our communities are poorly designed for active transport and pedestrian safety doesn't mean anything if we don't know how we're going to compare it to other places. And so
Mm,
having that connection to the big picture view is extremely valuable for an organization like ours that is seeking, to transform the way our communities are planned, especially on the front lines of the, interconnected challenges like climate change and health equity. And then, the publications that you put out, Dangerous by Design, we coordinate our advocacy efforts and communications around that work to help us advance our own policy agenda. And then just I think the larger opportunities that you guys provide and setting the table of national thought leaders around your equity summit are great opportunities for organizations like ours and my whole staff to be able to participate and even enhance our capacity. So it's you're at the federal level helping make changes in policy that we need to have happen, and that back and forth is really critical to having good policies in place and good resources that come down to the local level. So we need you.
no, and frankly, we need you. I mean, I think, just building off of something you said, I mean, one of the things that we see is how do all of us not become think tanks? And I don't want to disparage think tanks, but how do we actually get executed and implemented the policies that we fight for?
Mhm.
And so we know whether it's, the infrastructure bill, potentially Build Back Better, or whatever other federal legislation that comes about, or even state level legislation. The real question is not just what's in that policy or that bill, but then how does it get implemented? And frankly, too, how do we do a better job of preparing communities, community leaders, frontline organizations, and organizations led by people of color to both receive the funds, compete for the funds, and use them in the way that sort of follow the principles of smart growth. So, these partnerships are the opportunity to kind of accelerate that.
Yeah, that's right.
Wanted to keep on kind of the notion of local, national things that align. And wanted to turn to what is unfortunately a story of the last couple of days, which is the devastating tornadoes that have befallen upon Kentucky and other adjoining states, and just the devastation. And one of the things, as we first and foremost try to figure out how to rebuild those communities and help the people who are there. One of the larger conversations is, how does this relate to climate change? And I know that both, as you mentioned, educationally, but also in terms of your work now, that's sort of one of the core aspects of your work. So wanted to just ask you about climate change and how you think about when you hear about these extreme weather events, and how does that relate to your work today?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. I can't emphasize enough that for Louisiana, we're at an extremely precarious position due to being on the front lines of climate change, but this position also affords us tremendous opportunity. So living here, it's hard to be skeptical about the realities of climate change because we're all living with increased flooding, the aftermath of the weather disasters. But differences might come up in how we approach these challenges. But I always try to communicate the opportunities inherent in the challenges and the potential that we have to be a leader for the rest of the country and the entire world. And thinking about what's happened with the tornadoes, it's what we're learning and what we're going to see is that as Louisiana has been on the front lines for about 15 years now, acutely, that other places are going to be experiencing this and being on the front lines more and more, especially when we get to the 2035. There's going to be a tipping point that occurs, and it's going to look devastating. It's a complicated, a highly complicated situation because adaptation is means-based. And so I think for
Say a little
us,
bit more. What do you mean by adaptation is means-based?
so the people that have resources are able to recover, move away. They have options. They can adapt. They can transform their home. They can they can move to safer places. They can get jobs in other places, and it's highly means based. What we're seeing in Louisiana and have been seeing very clearly since Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005. And this is every year it increases, that those that do not have the means, they are left behind. They they have no other options. There's no 1-800 number to call to get to a safer place. I mean, we're sitting today at 4 months post Hurricane Ida, and we still have people living in tents across Louisiana's coast.
Wow. It's, yeah. Wow.
Mhm. And so I think that the smart growth movement and the planning profession is so critical in coming up with the opportunities to boost our economy, quality of life, and set forth a course that of how communities are created that we can all be proud of, and that's equitable and fair, and lifts everyone up. And so I think we have a lot of opportunities there. Being in Louisiana, having done this for so long, one of the things that a lot of my NGO partners and I continually talk about is, sadly though, we end up saying a lot of the same things. We're still having a lot of the same discussions with federal partners that we were having 15 years ago.
Right. Right.
And so I think we've got to transform how we respond to disasters and be much smarter in the policies and how the resources um, um, help adapt that area, not
Right.
just put band-aids back on, because that's what's happening. And so
Right.
I think with Kentucky, I hope that they're able, when they get into the longer range thinking around what they're going to do and how they're going to grow and build back, and that they think bigger about what that transformation looks like.
Absolutely. And, one thing that needs to be said out loud is it's no coincidence when you look at what places in Kentucky, as an example, suffered most from the tornadoes, or which parts of Louisiana suffer the most from some of the extreme weather events that cause flooding. We oftentimes, and we know this on a systematic basis, have placed the folks with the lowest wealth and the lowest means in the most likely places of harm's way. And that was done by structure, by planners, by federal decision makers. And it is not an accident that in many cases in Kentucky right now, you're seeing it's poorer folks who already have challenges, who are now having to deal with these extreme, new challenges that come from the tornadoes. And so, that correlation between lower income folks is, not by accident, and it is part of the design. It's not a bug in the system, it's a feature of the system.
Yeah.
The other thing that's associated with this, and I wanted to kind of move into this, is, there's a Venn diagram between who's this happening to when it comes to questions of class, lower income folks, lower wealth folks, and questions of race. And you mentioned the idea of this stuff being, how do we do this in an equitable way? And it really makes me think about racial equity as a specific topic. And, all of these issues have there are solutions, and then there are solutions that will actually benefit more equitable outcomes and not exacerbate some of the systemic racism that got us here in the first place. So I wanted to kind of ask you about kind of the smart growth movement and smart growth work, and how have you found people's reaction to what it seems to me that you've, under your leadership, moved CPEX into speaking more forcefully and purposefully about racial equity as an outcome of the work, and having that be something that's being discussed even at your virtual summit. Tell me about that journey and kind of what type of responses you've gotten.
Yes, so I couldn't agree more that we've got to be honest and transparent about the role planning has played and continues to play in creating disparities. And we've got to use that knowledge as a starting point for insisting that the power of planning be leveraged to reverse those harms. We will not be successful in addressing climate change if we aren't simultaneously addressing the many disparities and equity issues that, as you said, create this disproportionate burden on so many of our communities. So we've had a long journey, and we have been working to ensure that equity is centered in our work in Louisiana. So some examples include, making sure that climate adaptation benefits the communities with fewer resources, and designing neighborhoods that support health and mobility for every resident. Many Louisiana communities deal with, we've got deeply entrenched generational poverty. And so we've got to confront these realities in our own work and not be afraid to prioritize people and communities experiencing the greatest needs. And so writ large, SGA, I think, is and especially, thinking about where you've taken the organization, can support this work by emphasizing that racial equity needs to be a focus in all planning processes, even in communities that are, aren't on the front lines of climate change, or maybe don't have the legacy of generational poverty that our state has. But no matter the conditions, every place can benefit from centering equity and making sure that all residents have equal access to greater quality of life, no matter their race, their health condition, their status.
A couple of questions, just, you and I have had lots of kind of off the record conversations about kind of how to navigate this work. There's no playbook. There's no playbook for, how to be a Black CEO talking about racial equity on a national basis. And, I keep looking for it, but it just doesn't exist. And so one question I have for you, which will be a warm up to even a harder question, is what would you say to folks who work in states where you might work in a particular city where you could talk very clearly and candidly about racial equity or our history of racism and the like? But we have a lot of folks, and I see some of those states represented on the call today, where they have state legislators, governors, or major cities where they can't actually, even saying the term racial equity or using the term white supremacy or just saying something is racist, shuts down conversations, and they're trying to navigate, well, how do I get the racial equity in a context where people may not even want to acknowledge some of the issues? What's your advice for that?
Yeah, so every community that we work in, and then we work very closely with our state partners. When you sit down and start having a conversation and listening to perils and challenges and that those communities or even the state and supporting communities are faced with, um, racial equity and racial tensions usually come up.
Mm,
And so I think that, and maybe it's easier for white people to talk to me about it, because they might think, I don't know, but I haven't found difficulty in having the conversation except when terms are thrown around that people don't understand. And so we have tried to be really concrete with examples on what it means to advance equity or to center equity,
mm,
in our, whether it's um, the allocation of resources or changes in policies. And so I, it's been harder to talk about climate change in some areas, um, just because people, we're also, traditionally we're an oil and gas state. But I
mm,
think that in the first step for me as a leader, and I have a whole team, and we have a lot of influence and relationships, that we had to do the internal work first. And
mm.
so we came to the table, um, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, realizing, or 4 years ago, realizing um, we didn't have an equity vision or an understanding of what diversity, equity, inclusion meant for us as an organization.
Mm.
And so we were able to get a, a coach that worked with us, our entire staff, for a year, to take us through a series of activities and really having some difficult conversations as a team, to
Now, was
understand
that
where.
difficult for you, by the way, just personally being not a person of color, but having to lead those discussions and even the idea?
It wasn't difficult for me in the sense that, I think what was difficult for me was learning some things about our organization and myself that I hadn't thought of before, or that I just plainly didn't know. And that training really helped to uncover um, all sorts of biases and the foundation of our organization. And so, so much of which is based on what's called white supremacist culture. And when this was brought up to us, we were like, no, we are that's like KKK. That's crazy. And no one could grapple with that. And then when it was explained to us, that prioritizing perfectionism is part of a
Mm,
white supremacist culture. Well,
mm,
half of us are perfectionists, and we prioritizing the written word. Well, we produce lots of publications. So we went through a deep training and understanding of what DEI meant for us. We have we've developed a DEI goal and a vision statement, and we've since then developed internal policies where we're changing everything. But then that it's building blocks. You've got to dig deep and then understand how it you've got to make internal changes, but then it's the external changes that you then really get to being able to understand in a very different way because your partners change. um, you've got to change, who all you're collaborating with, and letting them lead, whereas you
Mm.
might have been leading in that space. And I love the term sharing power. Um, and so we're transforming. We're part of a transformation, and I think that everyone can do this, and it is very critical for our planning organizations across the country, because these are the biggest challenges we have as planners.
Right. Well, you talked about doing the work and internal, and one kind of internal external thing is actually your summit. And one of the sort of,
Yeah.
did you have any lessons learned in terms of how to broach questions of equity in your summit? And then what are you looking forward to in terms of Smart Growth America's
Yeah.
racial equity summit, which is coming up in January? Like, what did you learn and what are you looking forward to?
So last year, we also, um, equity was centered in every discussion. And I got a lot of pushback last year, but it was right before the election. And so it was just interesting that the types of pushback we got, because it was a heated political time.
Mm.
And so I'm just to contrast this year, we again centered equity in every discussion. But every single panelist talked about it as such a normal discussion, and how it was integrated in all of their work. And so this year was really, all the so much of the political tension wasn't there. And just I'm thinking about people that contacted me about the summit. But in every session, all of our experts, it was just it's been normalized as something so critical for us to address and lift up, and make sure that we make those necessary changes in all of our policies and planning. So I thought it was a wonderful series of panels. Everything's on YouTube if people want to see the CPEX YouTube channel. But I'm very
Mhm.
excited about your equity summit. I think half my team is already registered. And
Okay.
yes, and you've got you're digging deep into some really intellectual discussions, and I think it's going to be provocative, and I'm ready to feel that.
Awesome. Well, part of what we're trying to do and hope to do is also sort of marry the intellectual discussions with an idea and an eye towards implementation, and
Yeah.
basically say, well, hey, if I agree that racial equity is an outcome that I want of my work and there's a journey I need to go on, what do I actually go do? And so thinking about calls to action, creating ways for people to have the discussion after the event and move forward with some of the ideas they hear. So taking, going from ideas to action. And frankly, too, thinking about the summit as a platform and just a jumping off point, so that over the course of the year, we can have continued conversation and work on issues of racial equity. That's what we're trying to do in terms of setting the thing up. So
That's excellent. I'm really looking forward to that, and I know that you are a big proponent of making sure that everything leads to action, and so we'll be there taking notes. And I
awesome.
think it's important, and for all those listening in, to really share this opportunity, not just with the planning profession, but with folks that in the housing space and climate change space, because at the core, planning is at the core of it all, and making those connections is so critical. So we are doing a big push to all of our partners across Louisiana, even in sectors that might not consider themselves in the planning space, even though
Great.
they
Well,
are.
everybody's a planner one way or
I know.
another. Well, one, I hope to see you. I will see you virtually, and everybody here at the Equity Summit in January. And just want to thank everybody for taking out their time just to listen in on this chat with me and my buddy Camille. Camille, thank you for taking the time and just sharing your thoughts and your candor about these issues and how we do the work and walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So this will ultimately be, this chat is being recorded and will be up on our YouTube channel. And again, hope to see everybody soon, somewhere virtually. And if not this year, happy holidays, happy end of the year. And we'll see you at the Equity Summit in January. Take good care, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.